Yes, sir. I do.
Sir, would you introduce yourself to our board members and then spell your name for our reporter, please?
Yes, sir. My name is Jason Jones, Jason Jones.
And what's your current occupation?
I am a sergeant with the Columbia Police Department.
And what's your current duty assignment?
I am one of the 2 sergeants of the Criminal Investigative Division.
So you are over all of the detectives, basically.
I'm over, let's say, half of them. It's split into basically crimes against persons and property crimes.
And which one are you?
Property crimes.
Okay. And does that have anything to do with major crimes unit?
Yes, it's the former major crimes unit.
Okay. And you're in charge of it?
One of the 2 sergeants in the unit.
Okay. What was your previous duty assignment before that one?
I was a sergeant on patrol for about a year before I transferred into CID.
And by CID, you mean internal affairs?
No, I was,
I'm sorry.
before criminal investigations, I was on patrol for a year, and before that, I was in internal affairs.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
You spent a year on patrol between internal affairs and investigation.
Yes, sir.
Prior to internal affairs, where were you assigned?
I was in the detective unit.
As a sergeant?
No, as a detective
Okay. When did you first join the Columbia Police Department?
in 2000.
Patrol officer for some period of time?
I was undercover narcotics for around a year, and then went to patrol.
You went undercover pretty much right when you joined the PD?
Yes, sir.
Did you have prior law enforcement experience?
Yes, sir.
What did you do?
I was a police officer with the Nostrand Police Department
For how long?
a little over 3 years.
So you've been a cop since 1997?
Yes, sir.
In August and September of 2011, what was your assignment?
I would have been a sergeant in internal affairs.
And how was internal affairs structured at that point?
There were 2 sergeants in the unit to conduct investigations. There was a lieutenant over internal affairs, and then I believe there was a captain over internal affairs at that point.
And who was your fellow sergeant?
Sergeant Lloyd Simons,
And who was your lieutenant?
Lieutenant Krista Schaus Jones,
And who was your captain?
Captain Diane Bernhardt.
And what was your job as an internal affairs investigator?
I would investigate complaints, both internal and external complaints against officers. We would examine force that was used by officers over a certain threshold. Those would be the 2 duties.
And within those 2 duties, you were tasked with determining whether officers had violated policies and procedures,
Yes, sir.
whether they had acted in accordance with their trainings.
Yes, sir. We would make recommendations.
Okay. Did you take those responsibilities seriously?
Yes, sir.
Did you cut corners because you were investigating other cops?
No, sir.
Did you ignore or cover up evidence of misconduct?
No, sir.
Did you ever hide a file?
No, sir.
Are you offended by the suggestion that you would be anything less than completely thorough and impartial in an investigation?
Yes, sir.
Did you apply those same standards that you just outlined to the investigation you helped conduct of Rob Sanders in August and September of 2011?
Yes, sir.
So in conducting that investigation, let me ask you this, have you ever had a chance to review your investigative report from that incident?
Somewhat, yes, sir.
And this is already marked as Exhibit B and Enter, I'm going to hand it to you just so you've got it. And did you prepare the majority of that?
Yes, sir.
You typed it up?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you conducted the investigation in conjunction with Sergeant Simons
Yes, sir.
and Lieutenant Schaus Jones.
Yes, sir.
Captain Bernhardt wouldn't have had any direct involvement other than simply supervisory.
Correct.
In conducting the investigation, you interviewed a number of people.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you talked to Officer Casper.
I would have to look back and see which officers I actually personally interviewed for this investigation.
Well, let's just keep it with respect to the investigation generally then. The investigation consisted of interviews with Officer Casper
Yes, sir.
and Officer Sedgwick
Yes, sir.
and Officer Brandon Kreitz
Yes, sir.
And Matt Kibler, who was there,
Yes, sir.
and Matt's not with the PD anymore, is he?
No, sir.
Where's Matt, do you know?
He went into the military, I believe, in the Army.
Okay, as far as we know, he's in Ranger training somewhere, right?
Yes, I believe so.
The Army doesn't tend to let people out of Ranger training
Probably not.
willy-nilly, do they?
Correct.
You talked to Mr. Larson, the paramedic who came out to the PD to look at Mr. Bickford,
Yes, sir.
and you talked to Sergeant Bruce Houston.
Yes, sir.
You consulted with Officer Chad Craig, who was officer at the time, sergeant now, yes?
Yes, sir.
And the reason you consulted with him is because he was the use of force instructor for the department, or one of them.
Yes, sir.
Okay. As the person who implements the use of force, he's the one who sets the standard for the training in the department, yes?
Yes, sir, to my knowledge.
Okay. And so, as far as you're concerned, he's the expert in the field as far as Columbia Police Department is concerned.
I would say yes.
You talked to Rob Sanders.
Yes, sir.
You looked at all of the original police reports from that night.
Yes, sir.
You looked at Rob's training record.
Yes, sir.
You looked at just sort of generic departmental use of force training records. What did we do? When did we do it? That sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
You looked at all the videos.
Yes, sir.
And you did a variety of research, yes?
Yes, sir.
When you interviewed Rob, you had a copy of his report, yes?
Yes, sir.
You were tasked with investigating 3 allegations, as I understand it.
Yes, sir.
The violation of the duty to use reasonable force,
Yes, sir.
which we sometimes refer to as, in shorthand, as excessive force complaint, yeah?
Yes, sir.
You were charged with investigating an allegation that Officer Sanders had failed to provide proper medical attention as it's called for in the use of force policy.
Yes, sir.
And you investigated an allegation under the city ordinance of abusive or improper treatment of a prisoner.
Yes, sir.
And in evaluating the use of force, what did you determine?
That, in a nutshell, that he did not violate the policy for excessive force.
And how did you make that determination?
Based on the investigation, the totality of the circumstances known to the officer, how he was trained, past practices and customs, several things.
And you mentioned the totality of the circumstances, and that falls under the rubric of objective reasonableness, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if the force applied is justified, if it's okay to use force, then the force used has to be objectively reasonable, correct?
Could you repeat that, sir?
If force is justified, if you are allowed to use force in a given situation, then the amount of force you use has to be objectively reasonable.
Yes, sir.
And did you conclude that when somebody bangs on the holding cell door in the Columbia Police Department, force is justified to put them on the ring if they fail to comply with demands to stop?
Yes, sir. That was our past practice and custom at the time.
You've done it yourself, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
Put somebody on the ring.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever use force to do it?
I'm sure I did, but I can't think of a particular instance.
That's how your field training officers trained you to do it, right?
Yes, sir.
That's how your superiors trained you to do it.
Yes, sir.
That's how your training officers trained you to do it.
Yes, sir.
When somebody bangs on the cell door, they go on the ring. You give them a warning, and then they go on the ring.
If they continue to do it, yes, sir. Let me differentiate between a knock and someone pounding on the door also.
Sure.
There's a distinction.
Sure.
Correct.
Hey,
That would not warrant it, but
okay,
if someone.
it's bam, bam, bam.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And why was that? Why is pounding on the door get you on the ring? As far as you
A
understand.
couple of different reasons. Whether the arrestee was going to injure themselves, whether they were going to damage the locking mechanisms of the door. It wasn't just one reason.
Now, your investigative report is thorough. It's almost 40 pages, I think, just of the typewritten portion. Okay. In your view, you did an exhaustive investigation, true?
Yes, sir.
And under the totality of the circumstances and objective reasonableness, you went through factor by factor, true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is it true that every factor gets the same amount of weight?
I'm not sure how to answer that.
And let me rephrase.
Every factor is important.
If there's 10 factors, though, you don't have an equation where, okay, this one gets 10%, and this one gets 10%, and this one gets 10%. You look at and you determine what the most important factors are under the circumstances, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you do it based on what the officer knows at the time
Yes,
the
sir.
force is applied.
Yes, sir.
It's not hindsight,
Correct.
okay? It's what's expected of the officer and what do they know at the time in order to implement that expectation.
Yes, sir.
And you note that the policy must allow for split-second judgment.
Yes, sir.
Right? And that factors into the question of reasonableness. And you took a look at the policies for use of force, yes?
Yes, sir.
And you took a look at the policy for restraint devices.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And that policy says you may handcuff somebody to the ring,
Yes, sir.
right, if they're going to damage themselves, somebody else, or property.
Yes, sir.
And as we said, that was the expectation when you banged on the door.
Yes, sir.
There was, for whatever reason, there was no two ways about it. You pound on the door, you're going on the ring, and you don't stop.
After a warning, yes, sir.
Yep. Okay. And you reviewed a number of statutes and ordinances, true?
Yes, sir.
You looked at the state statutes for physical force and defense of property.
Yes, sir.
And you also looked at the city ordinance, which is essentially a mirror of that,
Yes,
true? That was on the mark, is that? Mr. Chairman, I'm simply going to enter in the record Exhibit F, which is the city ordinance. It's certified by the city clerk. I'm not really going to refer to it at all, so I'm not making copies for everybody. It's just simply, we put those other ordinances in the record. I'm going to stick this one.
I have no problem with the ordinance itself. I think my issue is that what you are going to say about what the ordinance is. So if you're going to put it in, what's the purpose of it? What's the relevance?
The relevance is, it is a city ordinance that's referenced in the internal affairs investigation. State statutes are self-proving, but city ordinances are not. It's simply for housekeeping, really.
It's mentioned, so I guess what I would object to is that I don't think it's relevant because that, to get an ordinance, you have to have a mental state to want to damage property. And that's never been really proven. So I guess I'll object to that. I have no problem with the ordinance itself. So to that extent, sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Sergeant, we've been here a long time already today. I will, I'm not going to belabor the investigation itself, but tell me what you recall about the conduct of that investigation. Just in general, what was the process and how did you come to your conclusions?
Process would have included reviewing the video, reviewing police reports, interviewing those subjects who were involved. I attempted to interview Mr. Baker, interviewing, as you said, Officer Craig at the time, use of force, person within the department. I believe I consulted with some literature with regards to use of force at the time. If there was more off the top of my head, I can't think of it.
But you and Sergeant Simons and Lieutenant Shouse Jones went through the factors. We've heard a bunch about
Yes, sir.
today. You haven't heard about it today, but we have. Okay, and you evaluated the situation based on the information that Rob knew at the time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because that's the equation. It's what Rob knew at the time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, does that justify the force used?
Yes, sir.
And with respect to excessive force, you concluded that he had not used excessive force.
Correct.
That based on the totality of the circumstances, Mr. Baker's propensity to violence, his history that night of tangling with officers, the manner in which he had tangled with previous officers, and the agitation level he was displaying as he seemed to be coming back up from the calmer demeanor, that in light of the force applied, that was reasonable.
In light of all that, in light of the training, and in light of the past practices and customs, that yes, that it fell within the range of reasonableness.
Now, you obviously watched the video and you saw Mr. Baker get thrown backwards, right?
Yes.
And you consulted with the use of force instructor, the expert in the field for the Columbia Police Department, and he told
Actually, he's
you,
an expert.
I think it's been classified that way and spoken about earlier.
And I think I objected earlier in saying, were you trying to qualify him as an expert? And then the answer was no, so.
well, no, the answer was not no. At that time, I wasn't qualified.
Then he hasn't been
as an
qualified.
Let's just say that he's the training officer for use of force in the city.
This
Whether
witness-
or not, we'll find that out.
This witness testified that as far as he was concerned, he was the expert in the field from CBD.
Or as he's concerned, that's
And that's my point. So you consulted with Sergeant Craig, or officer at the time,
Yes, sir.
and as the use of force instructor, the person who teaches the techniques,
Yes, sir.
he said the shove fell within your system. Yes, or the push, whatever you want to call it.
Yes, sir. I believe as I recall it, that he said he doesn't necessarily teach that particular move, but that it would fall within soft empty hand and hard empty hand control.
Just because he doesn't teach it doesn't mean that it's not allowed.
Correct.
What he does teach is a single hand strike, on
Yes.
strike, right?
Yes, sir.
This was a two-hand push.
Yes, sir.
He also said that it was not reasonably likely to anticipate that Mr. Baker would go flying into the back of a wall based on the push.
Yes, sir.
What did he tell you the expected outcome would be?
According to him, he said in his experience, a reasonable outcome is to stumble backwards or to fall to the ground.
So if I understand the investigation correctly, you concluded that force was allowed because that's how you do it, Columbia Police Department, right?
One of the things, yes, sir.
Yes. Well, what else?
Again, the defense of property, that was one of the things that we noted in the investigation.
Okay. And that sort of rolls into that's what we did, right?
Yes, sir.
Because when we're talking about banging on the cell phone,
Yes.
pounding on the cell phone.
Yes, sir.
Not just not.
Correct.
And so if force was allowed by the CPD in that situation, the question then becomes, was the amount of force used excessive or not, correct?
Yes, sir.
And based on your investigation, your recommendation was, yes, it was reasonable to use that maneuver under those circumstances.
Yes, sir.
And the outcome was not what one would expect from that maneuver.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
I mean,
It's the question, if you read it cold later, it could look one of two ways. The conclusion was that the outcome of going back into the wall the way Mr. Baker did was not the expected outcome.
yes, sir.
That's a correct statement.
Yes, sir.
And you made the finding of unfounded.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea why you used the word unfounded?
It was one of the 4 categories of findings. I believe the thought process for us at the time was that there was an allegation that excessive force was used. And so we unfounded the allegation that it was excessive. Not that force was used, obviously, but that the force was excessive.
So if the question was simply, was force okay? The finding would be exonerated, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
But because the question is the second level, force is okay, is the amount of force okay? Then it's a matter of, did the allegation of excessive force occur? And so the answer is no, therefore the finding is unfounded.
Right, I believe that was the thought process that I had, at least.
Do you think that the internal affairs findings and investigation was at all ambiguous about your conclusion that Rob Sanders did not violate the use of force policy?
I don't feel so, no.
Now, with respect to the medical attention piece of it, what do you understand the allegation was?
If I remember correctly, that medical attention was not provided. Adequate medical attention was not provided.
And what did you determine in your investigation?
That basically what happened was consistent with what we did at the time. We didn't have officers at the time that were trained in medical procedures. Basically, that at the time, what you do is go to a phone, call, get a hold of Joint Communications and have an ambulance respond.
And that's what happened.
Yes, sir.
No different than it had been done 100 times before.
Yes, sir.
That's a true statement.
Yes, sir.
It's another one of those questions that has a double negative in it. The third allegation, abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner. Did you reach a conclusion on that?
Yes, sir.
What was that conclusion?
That there was not a violation of that ordinance.
And we've had a lot of discussion here today about the fact that that's a separate allegation from excessive force and failure to get medical under the use of force policy, right?
Yes, sir.
And you understand it as a separate allegation.
Yes, sir.
And you investigated it as a separate allegation.
Yes, sir.
And you determined that Rob did not abuse Mr. Baker.
Correct.
You found no facts to indicate he abused Mr. Baker.
Correct.
Because the only thing he did was put his hands on him, which you found reasonable, and he called for medical aid, which is what he was supposed to do.
Yes, sir.
And you found that he didn't treat Mr. Baker improperly, right?
Yes, sir.
Because he treated Mr. Baker the same way you treat anybody who pounds on the cell door and doesn't stop, right?
Yes, sir.
He told him to stop, he gave him a warning, the guy refused to stop, so he used force against him, right?
Yes, sir.
That's, in the Columbia Police Department, that was the proper way to treat a prisoner who did that, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
Do you feel that you botched the internal affairs investigation?
No, sir.
Do you feel that you wrote the report in such a way that you were slanting it to protect Rob Sanders?
No, sir.
Do you feel that you wrote that report because you were worried about the embarrassment the department was going to face when this video got out and you needed to come up with cover?
No, sir.
Does it sicken you that someone would accuse you of that?
Bothers me, yes, sir.
I don't have any further questions for Sergeant.
Cross-examine?